Good morning, church. It is good to be with you here today. Happy Sunday, happy daylight saving time, or perhaps that's not quite so happy. I know I'm yawning a little bit extra, and Lance is preparing the church coffee a little faster and hopefully a little bit stronger for all of us this morning. Um, but even so, we still have breath in our lungs today, and it is good to be together. So today we want to look at a couple passages in Deuteronomy and introduce the book of Galatians very quickly. Chapter 13 of Deuteronomy about not tolerating idolatry. This is so intense and ferocious, and in fact has been the justification for religious persecution against other religious things. And I think it's good for us to pause and consider, how do we apply these verses today? So the first one is a false prophet, an individual, which really strikingly God says, when I send you someone, a false prophet, it is to test you. I am testing you. And we remember that in 1 John, John says in chapter 4, we are to test the spirits, because not every spirit is from God. And, John doesn't say the prescription is to kill the false prophet, but that's God's prescription in the Old Testament, this purging out and this purity of his people, his special people Israel, who would not tolerate any kind of um, false teaching or impugning on the holiness of his people. Same thing, the next section in chapter 13 against cities. If a city turns, the whole community, the whole country is to gather and wage war against them and wipe them out, because idolatry will not be tolerated. Now, when Jesus talks about this in Matthew 18, if there's someone being contentious, if there's someone misleading the church, in Galatians or on 1 Corinthians, Paul talks about handing that one over to Satan. Jesus says, put that one out of the church. The talk of putting that one to death is no longer discussed. But the act of keeping the bride pure is no less zealous. So that's something that church leaders, the church in general, needs your help with, is to know the truth and to be zealous for the truth, not in the sense that now we are going to kill those who are outside of the faith, but or leading the church astray, but that we don't tolerate that. That's not, in love, we don't allow that to come into our communities, but we put that out because we want the bride to be pure. And then we have something of a promise of God that is so interesting. In chapter 15, God says through Moses that if the people follow his commands, there will surely not be a poor person among them. And, even so, he has rules for how to lend, how to cancel debts. I mean, do we just delight in that concept for a moment? Canceling debts every 7 years, and then every 50 years, that jubilee of a total rest, everything going back. Just a delightful concept. But I was thinking this morning and reminded that Jesus said, the poor will always be with you. And I think it's even said later in 15, but you will always have the poor. Kind of an indictment against us as a people that, well, even though God promised, if we perfectly did his work, we will indeed always have the poor among us. There was one brief moment in Acts where we saw the church selling their possessions, consolidating their assets, when they did not have any needy people among them in Jerusalem for just a little bit. A pretty remarkable time. But that reminds us that as Christians, we really are called to look out for one another. And there's some tension in how we apply this to those outside the faith. And that could be a different discussion, but at least within the churches, for sure, we are to be looking out for and caring for one another. And we want to hold tight to this. Going back to the concept of being zealous for our faith, Galatians 1 verse 6, Paul says, I am amazed that you are so quickly turning away from him who called you by the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel. There's only one gospel. There's only one Jesus, one faith, one hope, one baptism. And so, church, I just am encouraging you today to hold fast to that faith. Don't turn away to the left or to the right, to anything else. Just hold steady to the one true God. I look forward to seeing you this morning. If you're in the area and you see this before church, we are going to serve up some pancakes this morning. That is March 10th, if in case you watch this at a later date. March 10th this morning, we're going to make some pancakes, serve them up at 8:30. I hope you can join us.